All right, hello, Bad Camp 2019. This is Backdrop CMS, the past and future. I'm Nate Lampton. I'm one of the founders of Backdrop CMS. Jen was also listed as a co-presenter, but she is out riding horses today, and so sadly could not attend the talk. So I'll be taking over her enthusiasm duties as best I can and portray to you exactly how awesome Backdrop CMS is. So, where we are today. So, Backdrop is 5 years old officially since Backdrop 1.0 that came out on January 15th. Coincidentally, we have the same birthday as Drupal itself does, kind of by accident. So, January 15th is Drupal's birthday. It's also Backdrop's birthday, so we can celebrate them together. I've actually seen cakes where they had them side by side, which is super cool. We've had 15 versions of Backdrop released. So we say 15 versions is in 15 versions that include new features. We have a release cycle that is every 4 months. We release another version of Backdrop. And so that's how where we are today. We're on version Backdrop 1.14, actually. We've been talking about just dropping the 1 number because, because there's just so many things that just keep happening all the time. So 6 years ago, let's talk about the origin story. And a lot of this is history and not so much as future. So I apologize if you're looking for too much future stuff, because a lot of this is just showing you guys where we've been and what we've been doing for the last 6 years. So 6 years ago, it was in September 2013 that we've been banding about the idea of forking Drupal. It was about a year and a half, 2 years into Drupal 8's cycle. It had become apparent that Drupal was taking a very different course from where it had been historically. And some core developers, including myself, were pretty concerned about the future of Drupal and recognized that Drupal 8 was going to be completely different from previous versions of Drupal, and had a concern, a very strong concern, that there were going to be a lot of alienated people on the current version of Drupal that wouldn't really have a path forward. And so on September 10th, 2013, the GitHub fork of Drupal was created, called Backdrop, and then 2 days later, first of all, people found the fork really quickly and started jumping in the issue queue. Everybody brought their own ideas about what it was going to be. People were like, this is great. We can build Drupal 8 completely differently now. And we're like, whoa, hang on, because everybody just wanted to change Drupal in a different way than with the way the Drupal 8 had gone. And we're like, no. Our objective, which we published 2 days later, was that we actually wanted to keep things more the same rather than changing everything all at once in a different way. So, not recommended if you ever fork a project. Prepare your thoughts first, write them all down, and then make a GitHub repository, or explain and don't make a GitHub repository, and then like weeks or months later. So, I'm kind of an action-oriented person though, and so I was like, let's do this thing, and then it went a little poorly. But we published this manifesto on backdropcms.org. It's like, don't panic. Randy Fay, the DDev developer, wrote a really excellent post at the time that was like, I really like the big friendly letters of Backdrop. That's a Hitchhiker's Guide joke. And so the manifesto contents, though, were fourfold. That we wanted to make it so that we could preserve the existing Drupal audience. All of those people that are using Drupal today or back then were using Drupal then. We wanted to make sure they could continue using Drupal, that they didn't have to be driven away by massive API changes or shift in direction of product, maybe moving more towards the enterprise and higher cost websites. We wanted to make it so that those people that were running Drupal, the people that are those people that were in the Drupal community could stay basically using the same software they already knew and loved. That was our objective. We wanted to make it so that we were a product for end users. We saw Drupal was being, we felt that Drupal was being heavily geared towards developers. Like a lot of the rewriting was basically just nerding out, saying, oh, we can do these things, we can make these changes because we can, And from an end user perspective, that's like, maybe you have to spend like hundreds or thousands of hours to get exactly the same thing you already had in Drupal 7, just because all the code changed. And so that's not end user focused, it's developer focused. So we wanted to have it be for end users. A different release cycle. This was right at the beginning of Drupal 8's kind of botched cycle, where that was only 2 years in, and Drupal didn't come out for like another 4 years until after that. So we were proposing that we have a different release cycle that is more frequent and also scheduled, and none of this when it's done business that was the Drupal 8 cycle. And then we asked people to contribute, to come and help. So that was where we were back in the Manifesto. It's pretty interesting to see that we've basically stuck to a lot of those same initial ideas throughout all of Backdrop's history. So early infrastructure, we made our website, backdropcms.org. It still really isn't much of a looker, quite honestly, but this is the original website that had almost nothing on it. Nice quote from Earl Miles. And then shortly afterwards, we made the API website that was actually, both of which were launched on Drupal 7. Some people are like, why are you running Drupal 7 for your API website? And we're like, well, first of all, Backdrop isn't out yet, so there is no Backdrop to run it on. And we love Drupal 7. We're not here to say that Drupal is bad. And in fact, the reason why we made Backdrop is because we love Drupal so much. So launching on Drupal 7 shouldn't have surprised anyone, because we consider it to be our previous version. We also had a fundraising campaign that I don't mention in the slides here that had generated a lot of mixed reactions, basically asking people for money, saying, hey, do you want to fork Drupal? Give us money. And yeah, that was interesting. We generated about $8,000 in revenue from that, though, and about another $12,000 in various donations that were unsolicited. That was really super cool. And where did all that money go? Well, that money almost immediately went into design work, because we have no shortage of developers and enthusiasm for developing, but design work is not really something that works super great in the open source model, because it's single purpose. It's not reusable like software is. So we hired Darius Garza, who's a local Bay Area designer, to do the logo, the backdrop that is a square with a corner being peeled away, so it's like a seeing behind the curtain, if you will. And then our mascot, drag and drop, if you will, that was made by Mark Movino. We also funded a lot of the design work for backdropcms.org and hosting costs, things like that. So after 15 months, this was also kind of crazy that we announced that Backdrop was happening, and then a little over a year, we made Backdrop 1.0. That was still more than 2 years before the release of Drupal 8. So what was in there? So the backwards compatibility layer was this one kind of small problem, actually, that Backdrop wasn't called Drupal. And we were explicitly given the nix on using Drupal. We couldn't call it Drupal Classic or Drupal 7 Plus or anything like that. So it had to be called something different. And the code base happens to use the word Drupal all over it. So, and one of the most practical problems is that we weren't called Drupal anymore. And so the backwards compatibility layer, or the Drupal compatibility layer, just renames all of the functions and classes that have Drupal and rename them like Backdrop. And that's turned on even until today, that you can still use all of these Drupal methods and functions, and they'll still work unless you disable the compatibility layer in settings.php. Backdrop 1.0 included our layout system. We included a port of panels in the very first version of Backdrop that makes it so that you have responsive Bootstrap-based layouts instead of themes owning the grid system or the block positioning. Layouts own the positions in Backdrop, which is very different from what Drupal 8 has done in the most recent releases, where it's still only controlling the content area. The layout system in Backdrop controls the entire page, like a panels everywhere type thing. And the configuration management system, also slightly different than what Drupal 8 did. It's based on JSON instead of YAML. Drupal 8 tried to use YAML everywhere. Backdrop being more compatibility focused kept .info files all over the place, again for compatibility, and because we weren't using YAML anywhere else, and YAML's kind of a cumbersome format, we went with JSON instead. It's faster, it's more compatible, so slight differences in implementation for sure. We ported Views module, fully built into Backdrop 1.0, and we implemented a global dialog system that was used instead of the CTools dialogues and the various dialogues that we had in Drupal 7. We upgraded our sites shortly afterwards. 10 days later, we got the API website upgraded, and then a month after that, then the Backdrop website itself upgraded. So very cool. Like, we're like, yay, it works. Like, you can upgrade from Drupal 7 to Backdrop. That's, yay, that's exactly what we're going for. Backdrop 1.1. Okay, this is our first, this is our first 4-month release, so January 15th, and then May 15th, and then we have one September 15th. And so, I'm sorry, we're about to go through, I'm already 15 minutes in. We've got like 60 slides to go, so this is gonna start feeling like a lot, like, so sorry, it's not going to be the most effective delivery mechanism, but it's going to be a lot of stuff. We added the new admin theme. We refreshed 7 in Backdrop 1.1. Still looks like this today. Looks great. The token module and token UI was added in the same version, and Path Auto was added in Backdrop 1.1, which it's just ironic where our priorities are, like Drupal versus Backdrop. That was the first version of first minor version of Backdrop. 1.2 came out 4 months later. We're continuing to iterate on the improvements to the admin UI and the admin theme that we made in 1.1, including making vertical tabs responsive. Very cool. We still have the single column node form layout. That's where our efforts have been, and so making things like vertical tabs work on mobile devices is important for us. We added CK Editor to core. There's great irony that the first version of Backdrop didn't include CK Editor, which was my primary work that I did in Drupal 8. So there's a funny story about CK Editor and how it basically made me flip the table on Drupal 8. But CK Editor got ported into Backdrop in 1.2. We also ported link module, email module, date views, date API, and date pop-up modules into Backdrop 1.2. All of these versions and all modules that we've implemented, I shouldn't say all, but all modules that are smooth ports into Backdrop, we're including upgrade paths for all of these things from the Drupal 7 versions. And the Drupal 8 approach to most of these things is that, whoa, link module, that does way too much. Let's make a URL field instead that only does URLs and doesn't do titles and doesn't have all of these crazy features for rel and title, like all of these things that link module does. Versus our approach is, like, there's a lot of people using link module and they need a path forward. So link module, as we know today in Drupal 7, is going to be long dead, while Backdrop will basically be the continuation of where that code lives for a decade or more. Because with Drupal 7 end of life coming up, and the modules that are under it already are not seeing a whole lot of attention, like, these modules are still improving and thriving in the Backdrop ecosystem, where the Drupal 7 ones are pretty much already just like zombies. 1.2 was our first time that we did integration with GitHub. All of our development happens on GitHub. Honestly, GitLab is super cool. If GitLab had existed, that probably would be a better fit for our community today. But GitHub was still the dominant player, and actually still is. And we have excellent integration between Backdrop CMS and GitHub, that all the developers do their work on GitHub. It's really great for collaborators, having a pull request-based workflow. And when new releases are created on GitHub, it synchronizes with the packager on backdropcms.org to make it so that the update module that says like new versions are available and stuff like that, it gets its feeds from backdropcms.org, but when you actually download the packages, they come from GitHub. So GitHub basically is our package repository as well. 1.3 was our first UX release. We had somewhere on the order of like 30 UX improvements. Transliteration module. We added making so that you could place blocks for each field into layouts. Custom text blocks so that you could place like a just like custom blocks like you had in Drupal 7, only they're stored in config. You can now log in with your email address, so login toboggan type functionality. You can choose whether email or username is acceptable. More responsive work, making it in the administrative work, improving the user interface with multi-value fields, 25 other UX improvements, some of which are like really minor, but just like the usability is just like a huge improvement. Things like we did all of these terminology changes, so that when you configure something, it gets saved into config. Instead of the button saying edit, it now says config, like everywhere. And so if you hit a button that says config, it saves into the configuration system. If you hit a button that says edit, it saves into the database. Like just like small things like that that can really help understanding and consistency throughout the system. We also did this thing that we reduced what I called pogo sticking in the administrative interface of Drupal, that when you set up a content type, you have to drill all the way down and set up the content type, then you have to go all the way back up, find the permissions, and then find the permissions page and set it up. And then you have to find the path auto settings, and then like go all the way up, go all the way back down to path auto settings, and set up the content type's path auto settings. So we just took all of the settings that were related to content types and put them all on the content type form, including the permissions and the path auto and the redirects and all of the things that previously you had to go to different places for. This really is Jen's favorite feature, and if she was here, she would have said she had 6 other favorite features before this one, but this one really is the tops. That is just a red dot that you can't not click on. And just tells you if there's something wrong with your backdrop website. It just checks the status report, and if there's a red error on the status report, then it puts a red dot in the admin bar. And you click on it, and it'll tell you what is wrong with your backdrop site. Like you forgot to lock down update.php access, something like that. 1.3 has one of these more subtle features that probably is under the radar because it's not visible, and that's the background fetch. So Backdrop's page cache has the concept of background fetch built into it. The same thing that Varnish uses, where it serves the stale copy, and while it's serving the stale copy, it goes and gets a fresh one. And then the next time it delivers a page, it serves the fresh page that it got in the background during the previous request. This makes it so that if your page cache lasts 5 minutes, every 5 minutes there's not that one poor user that gets a slow request. It makes it so that every user always gets a fast response, but one poor user gets a copy that's out of date, and then when they reload, they'll get the freshest copy again. So it's like 5 minutes plus one request is actually the way the page cache works, and you can turn it on and off. It's also super cool because stuff like cron, we have poor man's cron, and we actually kind of even encourage people to use it, because when a page request is made, it doesn't hold up the delivery of the page like it does in Drupal, where you probably see this on your sandboxes first thing in the morning. You open it up and the page isn't loading, and you're like, all right, never mind, I'm going to reload. Comes up instantly. That's cron running the first time because it hasn't executed in a while. Because in Drupal, the cron build holds up the delivery of the page, and in Backdrop, it returns the page and then runs cron in the background with the thread still open. Super cool. Yeah, so many things to say. We also established the project management committee here in 2016, working on the way that we manage the governance of our project. We have this committee of members, of which Mike and Jack are here and present, that help basically democratically vote on governance changes and help manage conflict resolutions. Just having a group of people instead of ever having one person responsible for something makes it so that our initial reactions to stuff can be wrong a lot of the times, and it just takes one other person to say, that's a bad idea, you know, to prevent a lot of big mistakes. And so Project Management Committee is the model that we've been using, adopted from the Apache model. 1.4, we added installer module to core. A lot of site builders don't distinguish between enabling modules and installing new modules. So the task of installing a module, site builders think of that as something that they're responsible for, yet developers are the ones that own that task. And so with 1.4, we added installer module that allows you to download and install modules through the user interface, like WordPress. And as a developer, maybe you're like, you know, how could you? But we're really trying to make it so that we're catering towards these users, the people that use the user interfaces. We added 10 new Bootstrap-based layouts in 1.4. It was also cool that we got to learn some things about backwards compatibility, because the old 4 layouts that used to be in Backdrop 1.0 are still there, they're just hidden. And so if you were using them, they're still there, and you can still use them until Backdrop 2 comes out. But all new sites all have these new layouts, and you can convert your old ones into new ones. We added redirect module to core. We found out after adding Path Auto 2 releases earlier, you very quickly need redirects, because when you change the title of something, you've changed the URL, and therefore you need a redirect. We added more menu features to blocks, and we made it so you can upload from mobile devices, upload images right into image fields. 1.5, this is a big one for us. It completely changed the appearance of Backdrop, because we had the new admin theme in 1.1, but we added the new front-end theme in 1.5, this theme called Basis. It's super cool. This video right here is showing you the hero block that we have, just a simple block that has an image and a rich text editor, so that you can put an image, there you go, like that, across the header of your site that has some text. So really simple end-user feature that you might build out manually in a lot of different ways in a lot of different Drupal sites. And this just makes it so that you have that capability right out of the box. We also added responsive drop-down menus in 1.5, mobile-friendly and everything. It's just there, and it's not theme dependent. It's everybody has it. So we put a menu item underneath another menu item. It makes a hierarchical drop-down menu out of the box. Let's see. We had the default homepage layout. We had an existing content block, and emoji support was happening in Drupal at the same time, and we ported it over. We made it so files became more complete entities. Basically, when you upload a file, no matter where it is, there's now the file management listing page. Drupal 8 has the same sort of thing. When we get forward, you can see that we're iterating upon file management in a slightly different direction than Drupal's media initiative. That drop-down menu that we added in the previous version, it didn't originally have the hamburger type menu, so we added the hamburger menu in the next version that made it so that on small screens you could, show and hide a hamburger, show and hide the menu with a hamburger. Also kind of cool, things are happening outside of the core development all the time. Some of our other community members, not native English speakers, for example, and we're struggling. Up until this point, people had been downloading the Drupal translations, throwing them on their Backdrop websites, and you've got about 90% of the string matches. But we're starting to diverge pretty seriously here, and so we're we need our own translation server. And so we set up the localize.backdropcms.org site. It's seen a lot of development since then that translators can come in and translate Backdrop the same way that people translate Drupal. And this runs Drupal 7. No shame, again. Drupal 7 works. Also really funny, at this time, Backdrop got forked, which is some people find to be rich irony. That John Franklin, one of our frequent core contributors, is kind of turning into the David Strauss of our community, if you will, that Silkscreen is analogous to PressFlow for Drupal, that it's the high-performance version of Backdrop. And so this one, it restored the database abstraction to use non-MySQL databases, which we only support MySQL, and we dropped support for other ones for optimization and consistency reasons. And it's made for multiple web servers and things of that nature. Let's see, 2017, Backdrop 1.7, linking to existing content. So the link dialog here just is now going to get an autocomplete, link it functionality from Drupal 7. So you type in the type of content you want or the URL, and it just autocompletes. We also did some work on the rich text editors. CK Editor had the ability for drag and drop upload files about this time, and we integrated it into core that when you drag and drop or copy and paste into the rich text editor, it's going to upload that file and make it into a real Backdrop-owned managed file. So it saves according to the settings of your editor and into the right directory, and it can be managed through the file manage interface. We redesigned the status reports and had additional improvements to the layout system. I'm not going to go and read all of these things. Second UX release, Backdrop 1.8. We did some work just on refreshing some designs. We redid the progress bar. We made it so that when you look at the diffs of the config system, that it has like syntax highlighting, both online and per word, so you can see the changes that happen when you deploy your code or deploy your configuration. The installer module got screenshots, which is super important for themes, because if you couldn't see the theme, like, it was really kind of like, what are you going to install when you install this thing? And we put icons throughout the user interface. So file entities, we're continuing to iterate on them. They got another refresh in the most recent version. But in 1.9, we added the ability to replace files in place, so more of the file entity module ported over into Backdrop. The login system redirects. Now you can choose, actually I don't think you can choose where it goes, but we just refreshed the way that the login pages work to make them more sane. You know how /user is like complete magic in Drupal, like we unmagicked it. New status report design. That was a small release. Sometimes they're small and sometimes they're big. A great thing is that Backdrop is always shippable all the time, like, so things only get in when they're ready. And sometimes the things that get in are just like the first iteration. So you see a lot of this, like, we did this small bit, and the next release we did another small bit, and the next release we did another small bit. And so it's a much more small iterations very frequently, rather than these like massive, like we dropped this huge module on you all at once. Backdrop 1.10 added comment auto-closing, so cuts down on spam on your websites. You can have it so that after 2 weeks or whatever, the comments on your posts automatically close. Also in the kind of realm of scheduling stuff, we added scheduled publishing, so you can automatically publish something in the future out of the box in Backdrop 1.10. Inline file uploading. You could drag and drop images into CK Editor, but now it works for files as well. And so it makes it so you upload a file and then link to it. Menu items finally became translatable. Translation is one of these things that I'll be frank with you, that Drupal 8 really nailed. Like, it's got a lot of consistency that never existed before in Drupal 7, and we are working on figuring out how to make, we have figured out, we're implementing now how to make it so that everything is translatable in Backdrop core without inventing new systems. So we basically have to use the systems that we have with backwards compatibility and then make it so that everything is translatable. And so a lot of things like menu items is just kind of one thing at a time, like getting it converted over. And then translatable blocks also in the same version. 1.11, let's see, we're almost a year ago now. We redid color module. Is Joseph in the room? Joseph, raise your hand. Redid color module, thank you. Which is one of these weird things that like you wouldn't think would get a lot of attention. Again, like end user focused, like a lot of people would expect to be able to change the colors of their website. And so it does a super cool thing where we got rid of the crazy JavaScript-based preview that required a lot of work to set up, and instead just an iframe of your actual site. And as you're changing the colors, it's using a session to show you your site in those different colors. And you can actually click that little link that says open preview in a new window and navigate your entire site in the new colors, and then come back and then save it when you're happy. We added an image browser. You could always upload an image or drag and drop, and more recently drag and drop an image. And then we made it so that you could just like see the images that you've uploaded recently. And this is just an addition to the dialog of the rich text editor that allows you to select from a library. And it's views based, so you can customize it to your heart's content, add filters and whatnot. Content preview. We took the preview button out like way back in 1.0 because the preview button in Drupal 7 you guys probably know, is pretty much worthless. Like, it's just confusing. And so a preview button in 1.11 did something that was completely different, where it's going to save that piece of content into the session and then make it so you can see it on your front end in exactly the way it's going to show up once it's published. And so it's just like a real preview that allows you to switch between view modes or display modes. 1.11, we also added hidden paths for content, which we have a really hard time explaining. It's rabbit hole module, but rabbit hole module just in general is a difficult concept to explain, but it's a very useful functionality. Contact module improvements. We switched to clients. The upload progress bars previously required PHP's extension in order to show the progress bars. Well, JavaScript now has all the capabilities necessary to do progress bars, so we removed that requirement and actually encourage people not to install the extensions, because if you have them, Backdrop will use it, compatibility. But if you uninstall them, then it'll use the client-side ones. And we added, this is kind of crazy, and we added the ability for Backdrop Core to update itself, which is a big thing. We didn't expose it to users, but we made it so that it could do it. You'll see how this iterates on itself in the next version. So, in the next version, we turned it on, right? So it was hidden. You could only do it by manually editing the config in 1.11, because in order to test the whole thing together, we had to make a release and put it out there to make it so we could actually test the updating. So in 1.12, we're like, this is working great. Let's make it so that users can actually do this themselves. So we added the ability to turn on manual self-updates in 1.12. And so when updates are available, just like modules are, even in Drupal 7 today, it can update the contrib modules. Backdrop uses the same approach to update core itself. We added options element into Backdrop core in 1.12. The terrible UI of whenever you have a list of options and it's like key, pipe, value, like just crazy. So options element makes it so that you can more clearly have keys and labels and then set default values, and it's integrated across core now. So it's for options, and I'm trying to think. There's one other place that you see this mechanism as well. That's not coming to me at the moment. More icons add to the admin bar. Yet more enhancements to the contact block. Taxonomy terms became translatable, localizable. We started using CSS grid. So when you create a view and you say show as a grid, you can choose whether or not that's a table or CSS grid, which is pretty cool. And some minor UX improvements to the modules page. 1.13, we've had this excellent layout system in Backdrop ever since 1.0. And Jen maintained a module in Drupal 7 called Total Control, which was based on panels. It was like, we should make it so that administrators have a useful place to see the stuff on their website. And so we have this module that makes layouts, and we have like this silly login system. So like, we should make it so that we make a dashboard just out of the layout system. And so that's what we did. We just made some new blocks that you can place specifically on dashboards. And then when you log in, this is the page you're taken to if you have permissions, rather than being taken to your profile page where it says you've been a member for 1 year and 6 days, which is just not helpful. 1.13, we're keeping up with new versions of PHP, PHP 7.3 at the time. We made more translation improvements that if you place a block that references a node, then it will automatically adjust with the language that is currently being displayed. Let's see if there's anything else in the play file. Nope. So, yay! We're almost at the current day. So, September 2019, this is just last month, 2 weeks ago, we made Backdrop 1.14. Backdrop 1.14 includes fieldable file types, so we're continuing again to like build a more file entity functionality into core. Also interesting, like Drupal 8's gone down this media approach where there's a media item that references a file or an image item or some other type of item. and files themselves are not fieldable, but media items are, and we're just like, compatibility, right? Again, like that stuff doesn't exist in Drupal 7, like file entities are Drupal 7, so for people moving from their Drupal 7 sites, we're taking the route that makes it so that they can maintain and upgrade those with the least amount of resistance. We have a new function, or new user interface in layouts now that you can assemble your own layouts through the user interface. So you specify the number of rows you want and the number of columns in each row. And it assembles a layout using the same Bootstrap grid system that all of the other core layouts do. It basically saves you from needing to crack open a template file to create a new custom layout. New installs include an editor role. Yeah, I know. This is also a thing that's really generating a lot of interest in Drupal land, but it's really easy to do. It's just arguing about what the editor role should do that it has all the problems. So Backdrop has there's just a lot less contention, mostly because there's fewer cooks in the kitchen. So it makes things easier for us. We ported over trusted host patterns from Drupal 8 so that you can have the security of making it so your site can't easily be spoofable. However, we did not make it so that it's an error right after you install. The future. So the future, Backdrop 1.15, let's see, that will be in January 15th, 2020. 1.15 will come out. We're continuing to improve media management and making it integrate better. Like there's some legacy stuff that we picked up from Drupal 7 that is just cumbersome. Like I won't get into it, but we're continuing to work on automatic updates. Automatic updates are a key thing that we've been working on for a while now. With the manual updates and then iterating on that. And we're making so that we have more integration between backdropcms.org and individual Backdrop websites that are twofold actually. A recent news block that pulls in feeds from backdropcms.org, so that nice dashboard that we have. Like we can tell people about stuff that's happening in the Backdrop community in their Backdrop websites by just having your Backdrop site ingest a feed out of the box that says, hey, here's some stuff that's happening in the world of Backdrop. Of course, people can turn that off. And package signing makes it so that as we get more and more towards automatic updates, package signing makes it so that backdropcms.org will digitally sign the packages before they're attached to GitHub, and then include keys in the XML feed of updates. And then when it downloads the package, it compares them to make sure that you didn't download a package from someplace else, which that kind of secret injection of automatic updates could be a way to hack a whole bunch of Drupal sites or Backdrop sites, or I think WordPress has been under fire for this for a long time, that they have automatic updates but they don't have any signing. So there's been some proof of concepts where good hackers are like, I could take over the internet right now with automatic updates. Okay, let's see. And then what other things are going to be in the Backdrop 1 branch? Automatic core updates I already talked about. We're still working really hard on getting config translation and translation in general improved across the board. And we still don't have actually a reference field in core, which is a big holdup. There's multiple options in contrib, and if you're coming from Drupal 7, every reference field has been ported to Backdrop so you can continue using the one you want. Or the one you were using, but we really need a centralized one that just works with everything and say, this is the path forward. Mike's feeling a little guilty there. It's not you.
I have pull requests.
Backdrop 2.0, when's that going to happen? We've had a lot of discussions about what we could put in Backdrop 2. But we keep finding that we can put everything in one. Now that you have the mentality of backwards compatibility and the way that we handle putting old stuff, making it deprecated, maybe removing it from the UI or new installs, and then it just makes it so we haven't run into really anything yet that we can't do that would require everybody updating their modules. And so our approach to Backdrop 2.0, the only date that we've really said is that we're not going to do it for a while. And in particular, November 2023, which is the Drupal 7 end of life, because we want to make it so that Backdrop 1 has the clear appearance of being the next version of Drupal 7. So you can always point your Backdrop site at Drupal 7, at a Drupal 7 database and run update.php. We use that same mechanism. that previous versions of Drupal had used to get onto the new version. So we'll continue to be using Backdrop 1 for quite a while. Also, I mentioned this a little bit, that we're using the iterative approach. It's now the Drupal 9 approach as well, deprecating things, adding backwards compatibility, and then in Backdrop 2, we're going to drop support for all of those things eventually. As opposed to the previous version of Drupal, all versions of Drupal were just like, good luck, every version of Drupal has always been this good luck approach in between different major versions, and none of them have been very smooth. We have a couple, one of the developers I like to quote, she works for a nonprofit here in Oakland and said that she upgraded their website, that it's been on Drupal since 4.7. She said the upgrade to Backdrop was the easiest Drupal upgrade I've ever done, which, which is still not very easy, unfortunately. It still takes weeks or months to upgrade your site from Drupal 7 to Backdrop, which is not where we want to be. We want to be hours or minutes, but it's a long way to get there.
That's because you got to upgrade modules and things like that. It's not just moving the data.
Yeah, exactly. So we're hoping that, we'll continue to try to make this as easy on people as possible, because lower cost is our primary. It's in our mission. So there's 2 minutes left for questions. Man, I'm glad we got through all those slides. So yeah, we can take 1, maybe 2 questions. You guys have any? Nothing? I'm sorry, that was, maybe you had a question 40 slides ago and it just slipped out, so.
Hey, I have a question.
Shoot.
So what are you going to do to make, upgrades from Drupal 7 into Backdrop? What are the concepts or ideas or central, focus?
To make it easier yet?
To get it down from, months down to days, or, what are the things that are...
So there are some things that, there's some things that have been put into core that could have had upgrade paths that didn't. And most things do have upgrade paths. Path autos, redirects, all of those fields, link, date, all those things have upgrade paths. So they'll move perfectly over from Drupal 7, all data and configuration intact. But there's some things that still aren't there. And when we get to things like references, one of the biggest holdups there is that if you make a new main reference module, you've got to worry about node reference and user reference and entity reference and all of those, and we need upgrade paths for all of them. So,
but since there are contrib modules for Backdrop for most of those, we also need to make it so it doesn't delete your existing fields and replace them if you don't want to. So. It kind of needs to be able to update, but it also needs to not clash if someone wants to not update all their fields. So it's sort of update.
Sorry, yes. Well, something like when we added UTF-8 MB4 support, which most people call emoji support, the Drupal world, if you had a Drupal 7 site and you wanted to upgrade to emojis, you had to download a Drush extension and then run it through Drush. And that was the only way. Has that changed? Yeah, as far as I know, that's the only way. In Backdrop, we integrated the database upgrade code into the status report. So it says, if your site is capable of supporting emojis and you just need to run an update, then click here. And then it runs the updates and then you're updated. And that sort of thing where we can identify possible upgrades or possible problems or migrations and then surface them to the user somehow, maybe not necessarily the status report, could be a solution to things like that.
Have we looked at the upgrade process also using the contrib module installer? So people's contrib modules all get installed automatically?
Ooh, that would be cool. If it just saw all the modules and then downloaded them.
Well, you know what modules are enabled in the database, so it could just go and make sure all of them are fetched and enable them.
Yeah, that would be super cool. And then there's also things that we can't make an automatic step for. And so for those things, the best we can do is surface the manual steps that are required. Some things like porting custom modules And we have coder upgrade for backdrop, continued out of the Drupal 7 history there, that you can point it at a Drupal 7 module and it will tell you as best it can, these things need to be converted, like variable set and get continue to work in backdrop, but you shouldn't be using them because they don't work with config management, so you can't move between environments if you're using variables. And so it actually does the best job of surfacing those issues, and then it does that crazy thing where it makes a new module that is like the backdrop version of a module that is pretty cool. And sometimes that actually works, and we could continue improving that. Jack?
One thing I just wanted to note with migration, something that does work is views. Views pretty much migrate already, which is a huge relief. So I think that only if you're using modules that really extend upon your views that are built into the views and the views depend on them, maybe that can get funky, but in my experience, views migrate.
Thanks.
How hard is it to move themes?
Sorry, we'll go over here and then we'll come back, yeah.
I was just going to ask about Drush. Is there a background version of Drush?
Yeah, so Drush is interesting that for now what we're doing, and almost everyone in the backdrop community I think follows this right now, is that there's a Drush extension for backdrop that makes it so that Drush just magically starts working with Drupal 6, Drupal 7, Drupal 8, and backdrop. But that only works with Drush 8 because as everybody probably knows, Drush 9 doesn't even work with previous versions of Drupal 8 anymore. So, but Drush is highly flexible, and it's even possible for us to make Drush 9 work with more systems than just Drupal 8, because Drush 9 right now has just one version, but Drupal 9 is around the corner. It's going to have to start working with 2 versions of Drupal again. And so Drush is highly flexible in that it's not actually tied to any CMS specifically. And so making it work with something like Backdrop is completely feasible.
The short answer is yes, Drush works great with backdrop.
Yes,
Just
the
have
short
to
answer.
install an extension and everything just magically works.
Yes, that is the short answer. but long term, like we may look towards like making our own CLI tool. Oh yeah.
How hard is it to translate a theme?
Themes.
Not hard at all. The theme system is pretty much untouched.
Yeah.
So-
It's still PHP based theming.
Yeah.
There's 2 major changes. The layout system makes it so your page template now becomes a layout template. That's the really big change. And we also
Mostly renaming the file also for the most part.
yeah, it's really not very hard. You have to move the regions out of your theme and into the layout instead, because themes no longer have regions. Layouts have them. And secondly, we removed the process layer. So there's pre-process functions, and then the much lesser known cousin process functions. Process functions were intended to do things like, in pre-process functions, you add CSS files, like add CSS, add CSS, add CSS. And then in process, it takes all of the CSS files and like turns them all into one variable. We removed that process layer and instead just started putting like the calls to the functions that get the CSS or concatenate the class names into the template files directly. So it makes it so there's one fewer layer of abstraction there, because we found out that I think most people's experience, and ours definitely, it was just process layers just made things muddy. Like it was just another confusing magic thing that happened. So those are the 2 big things. But updating theme is not particularly difficult.
Just curious about usage.
That's a great question. So usage, what does adoption look like? We have 1,000 reporting backdrop websites currently. We have the same usage statistics that Drupal has, which isn't a huge number. It is interesting that our community, which consists of around 100 developers now in core and contrib, maybe there's overlap there, I'm not totally sure. There's like 80 in contrib and 100 in core. It means that we have a highly active developer community relative to the number of sites that we have. So it's just this thing where there is still right now, like, there's some faith that has to be put into use Backdrop. We're still in early adopter phases, like people that can probably, smooth off a rough corner or 2. Drupal developers are the prime candidate, of course, because every Drupal developer is a Backdrop developer. And so clients right now, like developers might be there and being like, yes, this is totally awesome, but clients are like, what's Backdrop? You know, where's, quite honestly, like, where's the Acquia of Backdrop? You know, like the agency support isn't there for Backdrop like it is for Drupal. And so call to action, if you're interested, like advertise the fact that you support Backdrop. Like your agency right now, I guarantee you could support and build Backdrop websites like today. Because it's Drupal 7 with some major improvements, like no more features because we have configuration management.
So part of the problems with agencies is all the stuff that we're fixing is kind of like front-end site builder stuff that agencies don't like, you know, professional engineers don't really necessarily need or want people to be able to do. So it's almost like kind of antithetical, like, you know,
yeah,
if
because
you make things so much easier for the user, then you don't really need the engineers.
The agencies, yeah, because we're trying to make it so that this is a product for users. Like we want individuals, we want one-person development shops. Those are the people that we want, nonprofits and people that have really like limited budgets. Like that is our audience. We're trying really hard to fit that and leaving Drupal 8 to the high end. Like we feel that those people were like left stranded, and that's what we're trying to help. And so you can use Backdrop for a big site, like a really big enterprise site, and you could use Drupal 8 for a really small site, but you're always going to be fighting the direction of the project. Like you should use the product that is made for the audience rather than trying to shoehorn it into something it's not. So that's what we're hoping to do with Backdrop, make it so that those people have a way forward. We're out of time, so I'm just going to say thank you all for coming.